that means the issue with 6 would be the presence of evil means at least one of those attributes aren't working. If evil exists, and so I have to explain this so you get what they're saying. They're saying, refer back to 1. They're saying for God to exist, He must have all these qualities. That's the claim. Number 6 is saying that because evil is in existence, God can't have all 3 of these qualities. He can have 2 of them, but He can't have all 3. So if He has 2 of the qualities and not 3, then He doesn't exist. Either He doesn't exist as we worship Him, and He's not worthy of worship, or He doesn't exist in reality, and you conclude, number 7, therefore God doesn't exist. This argument was laid out by Michael Tooley. He's a popular philosopher. Okay? Now, if philosophy doesn't do it for you, and all these propositions and syllogisms are not your thing, I can put it in simpler terms. How can kids die of cancer and animals suffer a slow, agonizing death being burned alive in forest fires and there be a God? How can both of those things be true? How can you tell me your loving God is real and we have hospitals full of cancer? St. Jude is a thing, yet your God is real. The wildfires in California happen, but your God exists. The tsunamis that happen that wipe out southeastern countries, or earthquakes that happen in Haiti, all these things happen, yet your God is real. How can that be so? The goal of my teaching tonight is to prepare us to have a response to this question, because people will ask this question. The first thing I want you to say, the first thing that we have to realize, this is our first stop. When somebody brings up this question, your first move should be to validate their emotions. The people who bring up this argument are hurting people usually. Now, if they're a professional, like someone who debates for a living, then they're bringing it up ideologically. But the likelihood is, the random person that you meet on the street, if they bring this up, it's probably because they have a sick family member that died, or they had a difficult upbringing, or they had some issue, they had some problems that they encountered. And so, having a well thought out philosophical response to somebody who's hurting, you might win the discussion, but you lost that interaction. Stop with them. Check with them. And say, hey, I know you're asking this question, but is everything all right? Have you been through a hard time? Do you feel like Jesus let you down? Do you feel like Jesus wasn't there for you? And it'd be more effective to take the conversation in that direction, as opposed to let's get into an ontological discussion about whether God is a real concept or not. Proverbs 25 and verse 11 says, "A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver." We have to have wisdom when we speak. We have to know, just because you have the right thing to say, you got to know when to say it. It's not enough to have the answer, you got to have the when. That's wisdom. That's what separates a novice from somebody who's experienced. It's not just having Bible knowledge, it's knowing when to share what knowledge, at what time, in what way. That takes experience. And you can't move beyond experience. You just have to live life. Proverbs 15 says, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger." You have to realize that when you're getting into a debate with somebody, be gentle. Even if you're getting attacked, even if they're being rude to you, don't lose your temper. If you lose your temper, if you get emotional, you've lost the interaction. Unfortunately, I sit here before you all, and I have gotten heated. I was a step away from squabbling a couple times. I forget that I'm online. I was about to name drop. There's been somebody here knows the person I'm talking about got me worked up. Oh my goodness! Never have I met a more frustrating person. Oh my goodness! Can I tell you the thing that gets me going is when I'm talking to somebody who does not have intellectual humility. They're not even open to the possibility that they could be wrong. If I'm talking to somebody, and I lay that on the table, this is what I believe up until this point, and I could be wrong. And I say, here are the things that if you can explain these things to me, my mind can be changed. Because I'm not infallible. And I ask the person the same question. Oh, I know I'm right. I'm like, brother, that's crazy that you feel that way. And so it was a frustrating discussion, to say the least. So you never win by getting angry. Once you get angry, you're losing. So just stay calm. Another word that I'll share with you, just because if you're having this conversation and you're doing research online, this word is going to come up. It's called theodicy. 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 It's called theodicy. It's going to come up in your studies if you're looking into this topic. It's any argument that you use to resolve the tension between evil and the existence of God. So all the arguments we put forth are called theodicy. Okay. Theodicy. So, if we're going to talk about the problem of evil, the way I've split this up is into two major domains. There is suffering that's non-human related, and then there's human-related suffering. And so when I say non-human related suffering, I mean things like natural disasters, I mean things like disease, different things like that. You know, why did this person get cancer? God didn't heal it. Or why did this natural disaster, you know, why did Katrina happen? And, you know, I was about to make a funny joke, but not do it. Ooh, man, I had to catch it. Right there. I was about to say something crazy. But we good. You know, why did all these different things happen, right? And where's the answers? How do we have answers? So let's focus first on non-human suffering. So there's several arguments that you can make. I'm going to give you the technical names just so you have them, but I'm going to try to explain them more simply. And if you've been in church for any amount of time, what's interesting is a lot of these arguments have been preached one way or another. You'll hear it. You just haven't heard it in its technical form. So for example, this first one, you're going to hear this name. It's like, I've never heard of that. I'm like, yes, you have. You've heard it in preaching, I promise. It's called soul-making theodicy. Is that word again? Soul, like what you have in your body. Making theodicy. Soul-making theodicy. And so people like Irenaeus, John Hick is a big proponent of it, and Richard Swinburne. These are just a couple of people. If there's anybody you're going to look into, like if you want to really study this out, the person who's really for this idea the most is John Hick. So somebody you want to look into. So here's the basic idea. Evil and suffering happens so you can grow. And you've heard that preached, right? So they'll put the spin on it. How can you have growth without a little bit of resistance, right? You've heard a sermon like that. How do you build muscle and stuff without resistance? How do you do this without resistance? And so they frame it in resistance. Resistance is part of the growth process. You have to go through some things to grow. You have to go through it. That's basically what this argument is. It's soul-making theodicy. And whether the preacher realizes or not, they're trying to make the argument that, well, the reason that we have difficulties in this world is so you can develop virtue. How can one be virtuous if there's no circumstances and situations to practice virtue? How does one say, I'm not a liar, unless you're in a situation where you need to lie? We don't need to lie, but where one would choose to lie. How can you say that I'm not a brawler unless you're in a situation where you would want to throw hands? How can you say that I'm not A, B, C, and D? How can you say that you're virtuous if you're not in a situation where you couldn't entertain the vices of man? What does it mean to be good unless it's contrasted with the bad? That's the argument. Soul-making theodicy. So there's some strengths to the argument. Some would say that this helps account for natural disasters. Yes, I lost my home in this disaster, but this put me in a position that I've never prayed in the way that I've prayed since I've been in this situation. My prayer life has skyrocketed. I've learned to trust God, and now that I'm on the other side, I can look back, right? You can say adversity. It makes sense of the things that I'm going through. I went through this bout with cancer, and I know that I'm in stage 4, and it just looked like I'm not going to pull through. But before I was wayward. I was far from God. But this slowed me down, and it put my eyes on Him. And I may have lived a full life without this cancer. It would have been a full life that ended in hell. But now I have a short life guaranteed as the prologue to my eternity with Him. They say that it is a way of making sense of the hardships that we're going through. They turn evil and suffering to opportunities for growth. It turns evil and suffering into opportunities for maturation. But there's a problem, though. These arguments aren't perfect. Because some suffering feels a bit excessive.
Yeah.
The technical term they use is gratuitous suffering. That's the word for that. It's like, God, I know you're trying to teach me a lesson, but like that hard, bro? It's like when you get whooped by your parents, and instead of like, hey, I'm gonna whoop you, and here, let's say I'm gonna give you 5 swats. But then the parents like, no, I'm gonna whoop you until I'm tired. But like, 5 swats would have been enough, but whooping me till your arm tired, that's kind of crazy. It's not like gratuitous punishment, like you ain't gotta hit that much. Like that extra lick back will make me learn a lesson. It's like, you know, how much whooping is too much whooping? And when you're going through it, you're like, God, I know it's hard out here, and this is for my good, but like, is it really for my good?
Yeah.
Did it gotta really be this hard, God? So that's the criticism. And they say, the skeptic would say, that this doesn't account for unnecessary suffering that has no end. They said, okay, that's cool, but what about the deer that's burning alive? That ain't helping the deer. The deer is just suffering. And so that's a weakness of the argument. I'm not going to make a full defense to these different arguments because these aren't ways that I would respond. So I'm giving you the pros, I'm giving you the cons, and you can decide what to do with it. You should think through these more deeply. But what's going to happen is different arguments resonate for different people. Like some people find different things compelling. So I'm going to bring a couple to you tonight. If one feels really compelling to you, then what you can do is take the time to work through that particular argument. So I'm just giving you like a really big overview. So you can pick one and say, I really like this one. So there's a similar one. So instead of soul-making theodicy, there's another one called greater good theodicy. Very similar. They're similar in the sense that suffering has a purpose, but the way they're different is what's the purpose of the suffering, right? In the soul-making theodicy, it's God is using this for your development. In greater good theodicy, it's something more like God permits evil because there's a greater good that's going to result from it. There's going to be something better that's going to happen from it. And this good might not have arisen any other way. It's like, how does one develop courage unless you're on the battlefield and you see people dying? You got to choose to be courageous. How would Israel become a state if not for the horrible acts of Hitler? Surely that was a springboard to becoming a state, and depending how you interpret the text, and let's say you're a biblical Zionist, and you say, well, God promised them the land, well, how's Israel going to get back in the land? You could make that argument. I'm not making an argument for or against that. I'm going to devote a whole lesson to Zionism. And we can explain the difference. That's a big button issue about, from the river to the sea, and, does Israel have a right to that land? We're going to touch those topics. When I do talk about it, I'm talking about it biblically, not politically. I can have political opinions that maybe not agree with the biblical opinion, but I'm going to put the Word of God above my personal sentiments. And I think the Bible lands very plainly in one direction. So I won't spoil that. we'll get there when we get there. So, but we are going to talk about what the Bible and Israel and how do we work through all that. Anyway, off topic. So people who are really big fans of this, people like Thomas Aquinas, C.S. Lewis. There's a guy named William Lane Craig. He does a lot of philosophy debates, so he's probably a resource. But he can be, I would look to C.S. Lewis. He's probably a little bit more reader-friendly. William Lane Craig can be a bit much, so maybe I try C.S. Lewis if you look more into this. So it has some strengths. Some strength is that it's pretty comprehensive as an explanation. Bro, you can sweep everything under this rug. God's working out for the greater good. You know, Romans 8:28, baby. You say, all things work out for his good. Come on, all things are working out for the good of God. You can put that on everything. You said, what happened? He's working it out. All things are for his good. Oh, does that mean my car keys in my pocket? Oh no. Oh, keys on the floor. Make sure I'm beeping. All right, there we go. You can slap Romans 8:28 on everything. You said, what happened? He's working out for my good. We all right. You said, what? He's working out for my good. What? Working out for my good. Now, so the benefit, strength, is you can use it for a lot of scenarios. You can use it for people being bad. You can use it for nature. It's just, and that's hard to, how do you respond to that? Oh, God's working out. We just gotta wait, find it out. Like it's not a, Now if they're real thoughtful, they'll have a response. Of course, there's criticism like, yeah, God's working out for the good, but like, did it have to be that hard? Or I think, I'm not even a skeptic, but I have a criticism as like, people who use this all working out for the good, I feel like that's what people say when they don't want to deal with their emotions. And so they're running away from their emotions. Instead of processing their hurt, they're just like, God's working out for my good. I'm like, okay, you can mask your hurt, but like, that's probably not the play. And your long-term development is probably not going to be good. But he's working out for your good, so, all right. Yeah, so working out for your good should not be an excuse to not deal with your feelings and emotions. That's crazy. That'd be my criticism against it. I know I'm not agnostic or atheist right now. Just in case you're wondering. So those are some arguments for like natural evil, like non-human evil. With some responses. But what about evil at the hands of humans? Like, we have whole governmental structures that are just out for blood. We have the Communist Party of China persecuting Uyghur Muslims just for being Muslim and just slaughtered in internment camps. North Korea wiling. And I'm not some person who is, I'm not the sort of Christian that holds America on this unique pedestal. I'm real skeptical. There's a lot of good Christian folk who are like, and God's going to use America in the book of Revelation, and America's going to do this and this. Brother, we're going to be judged with all the other nations. I am not hopeful. Like, sheep and goat nations, we are a goat nation, y'all. Like, come on, stop playing. America's a goat nation. I'm very pessimistic. My bishop is very optimistic, so, But most of that generation is, right? A lot of people from the boomer generation, very optimistic for the outcomes of America. Very optimistic. Nah, America's rough. Spiritually, morally, I don't know. We're not much different. Politically, I think we're a lot better than some of these crazier nations, but even still, we got ourselves that we don't handle right.
Yeah, it's real.
And so you're looking around, and there's injustice happening. You're looking around, and the widows and the poor are being oppressed, stuff that Amos complains about, and we have the fatherless being mistreated. You see that in every nation around, in every nation on the planet. And so, how do you respond to the evil that's happening at the hand of men?
Right.
Well, this is probably the most defensible of them all. I think this is the easiest. That sort of evil is the easiest to account for. Assuming they believe in free will. So a lot of atheists don't believe in free will. Basically, it's the idea that people choose to be wicked. So as long as you believe in free will, then yeah, that's fine. Unless you're a Calvinist, then this is really hard and awkward. If you're a Calvinist and God ordained everything, so then like, what do you do with that? You know? The evil is here because God did it. And God delights in it being here, and He's using it for His purposes. Like Calvinism is a weird doctrine, dude. I'm not with that. We believe in free will. I don't believe in determinism of any kind. I'm strongly against determinism. So if you're going to talk with somebody who's a skeptic, they're probably going to be they're going to be deterministic in their outlook, meaning they don't believe in genuine free will. And there's different levels of free will spectrum, right? So we have like super fatalistic determinism, which is like your genetics determine basically everything about you. That's an extreme. Another form of determinism is you're a product of your environment, and so you've had these experiences and they shape you. It's another level of determinism. So it's a combination of some of your biology, some of where you were brought up. So like your outcomes are limited. This is what's going to happen. Then there's like the super free will, like humans can literally choose anything. Like complete free will. Actually, I'm not in that camp. I'm a little left of that. We're free to choose, but we don't have unlimited choices. We're free to choose, we don't have unlimited choices. What I mean by that is you're going to choose what you think of, but you're not going to think unlimited thoughts. So you only have so many options. And then two, there's a difference between what you think and what you meditate on, right? You're not the thoughts that come to you. Remember, if you don't remember this, thoughts happen to you. And I believe that. I don't believe we choose the things that come to our minds. Because you know what I'm talking about. You have little stray thoughts. You're like, bro, what was that thought? If that's who I am, yeesh, rough. Who you are is what you meditate on. So I'm going to remind you of that. And so if these thoughts are coming to your mind, well, why are they coming to your mind? Well, I think that's a biological process, something with synapses and consciousness arising from our physical brain matter and whatever. And so you have consciousness, but we do have the liberty to choose among those thoughts. And that's what we're accountable for. Yeah. And now, are there things that we can do to influence the sorts of thoughts that come to our mind? Yes, there are some things we can influence. But as long as you're not a sick person, you're not going to be going up a flight of stairs. You know what thoughts are not going to cross your mind? I could probably grow wings and fly downstairs. Right? So you're not going to choose to even attempt to do that because that thought's not going to come to your mind. Unless you're ill. You're not going to be like, I'm about to fly down these stairs. Wings out of my back, I'm an angel, going for it. Right? Like that's not how people think, typically. So the things you decide to do are limited. Alright, so back to the free will thing. So the core idea is God gave humans genuine free will, and moral evil arises from human beings' misuse of this freedom. And so God has assigned value to having free will. And when you have free will, that allows for love, virtue, and moral responsibility. And I heard an argument on Facebook just today. They said, why did God give us free will? Or why did God even allow the opportunity for evil? He said, well, free will needs to be real so we can genuinely love Him. And the guy was talking to this random person on the street. He said, if I kidnapped you, tied you up, put you in my basement, and held a gun to your head and said, you will love me. He said, do you love me? She said, what are you talking about? No. He said, yeah. So imagine not being able to choose to love someone and then calling that love. That's humans without free will. And we have to have the genuine choice, which means we have to have within us the capacity to not love God, which means the capacity to do wrong. Because if we love God, we're going to do what's right. If you love me, what do you say? Keep my commandments. Yeah. And so unless you have the capacity to not keep his commandments, which means I believe that Adam and Eve had within them the capacity. I don't believe Adam and Eve were perfect. I don't believe that. I think that they were without, I don't think they had a perfect nature. That's a whole separate conversation. You know what, I'm about to get off into a tangent that I don't want to get into tonight. Because that's a whole big deal. Needless to say, they've always had the capacity to do wrong. And so our capacity to do wrong, is that associated with our sin nature? Like to me that's weak. Anyway, we'll table that for now. But yes, because of our free will, we have the capacity to do what's wrong. So obviously, the strength of this argument is, I think free will makes perfect sense for why humans do bad things. The problem is, it doesn't talk about natural disasters and stuff. So it explains some evil, but not all evil. Yes?
What was this one called?
The technical, this one goes by many names, but you can use free will defense. Free will defense. I had two more that I could give you, but I'm going to just give you one of those two because the fifth one is a bit involved, and I'm not going to deal with it tonight. It's a bit much, and I don't want to deal with it. So we'll just talk about one more. And this one, I couldn't categorize it between the two, so I just put it as like a general response to evil that people use. It's called eschatological response. If you don't know how to spell that, that's okay. ESCHATOLOGICAL. I'll spell it a second time. Eschatological. ESCHATOLOGICAL response. Eschatological. That word means end times. Talking about the end. That's what that word means. So, to me, I'm going to just put my cards. This is probably one of my least favorite. This is such a cop-out answer. I don't like it. I think it's a cop-out. So here's the basic argument. Evil is temporary, and ultimate Christian hope is in future restoration. Like, you know what? It's hard now, but God will make it right in the end. God will make it right in the end. Okay. And there's a bit of that that's true. It's like there's an element of truth to that, which I'm with, but the huge weakness to that is like, that's cool, but like, I just got my leg amputated, and so like, and that's going to cost me a fortune that I don't have to pay for this because my health insurance is okay. So now I have hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical debt that I can't pay off. So yeah, God will make it better in the end, but life is hard now. And I make too much to get a lot of help, but not enough to get out of this situation. Right. Luckily, I work a desk job, so I don't need my leg, but $100,000 a year is not paying off this debt. And I've already missed a lot of work, so I'm behind on my other bills. So like, you know, it's hard. So saying, well, God will make it right in the end, completely invalidates the suffering that they have now. It doesn't confront the pain of today. It's true. God will make everything right in the end. He will. He will absolutely do. Yes. But we're struggling today, and the person you're talking to is struggling today. So for some people, this offers comfort and hope. And if you're already a persuaded Christian, there's a hope in this. I find it hopeful. I look to heaven as my encouragement. I really do. So this argument is only useful for people who are already Christian, because we have the hope of heaven. But if you're lost, bro, you're not going to heaven. You don't get to be a part of that hope. Your future is burning in hell. So like, how is that helpful? And so like, for a Christian, this is a solid argument. I get the rule and reign with Christ. It's going to be a wonderful eternity with Him. Awesome. And you know, He's going to wipe away every tear. I'm moved by that. Those verses move me to tears. In the twinkling of an eye, I'm going to be changed in a moment. 1 Corinthians 15. I love that stuff. That works because I already believe.
Yeah.
But if you're a skeptic, you're like, that's a bunch of nonsense. So it pushes what you're doing is you're pushing the problem of suffering into the future. And we'll deal with it when we deal with it. Jesus will handle it. Thanks, Jesus. You're the best. And just never do anything about it. So great for Christians, not so great for skeptics, would be my complaint. Okay, I have now 20 minutes left, and I'm going to allot this final 20 to trying to articulate to you how I understand the problem of evil. I don't have this fully worked out in my head quite yet. And so what you guys are going to hear tonight is I'm like 43% there on where I land. So I'm really workshopping this idea. So this is Pastor before he's fully worked out an idea. So ask me this question again in about 5 years, I'll have a different answer. But I'm about 43% of the way there. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you some of the verses that make me stressed. And then I'm going to just talk through it. So I'm going to read in rapid succession 6 verses. And as you're hearing these, they're going to make you like a little bit like stressed. They should. I hope so. If you're really listening to what it's saying, it should. Ecclesiastes 12. This one's not so bad. Ecclesiastes 12. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every word into judgment and every secret thing, whether it's good or whether it be evil. Okay. Isaiah 45 and verse 7. Crazy verse. Wild verse, by the way. The I in this is Yahweh. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. That keeps me up at night. What does it mean for God to create evil? That's cool, crazy, interesting thought experiment. Genesis 50 and verse 20. But as for you, you thought evil against me, but God, he meant it unto good to bring it to pass, as it is to this day, to save much people alive. God intended for me to be put in a pit, sold into slavery, lied on, separated from my family, raised my kids outside of my culture and foreign culture, and sit on that for over a decade and never get the chance to work through the trauma that I'm feeling on the inside for much of my adult life. And I have to put on a strong face when my brothers finally come to me and be the bigger person. God organized and orchestrated that. So what a thing to say. Ecclesiastes 9:11. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not given to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither the bread to the wise, nor riches of men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happens to them all. What? I can do all the right things and life is still awful? Yeah. Then what? I read this and like whoever wrote Proverbs is a dirty liar. They said that if I do X, Y, Z, here are the results. Right. But the writer of Ecclesiastes says, yeah, they said that in Proverbs, but no. Yeah, but no. I couldn't get the verses because it's such a long piece of text, but just the first couple of chapters of Job. Like, huh? Man out there being righteous, living for God, and the accuser comes in like, what's up, God? I can get over the turn on you. And God's like, bet. Bet? What do you mean, bet? What? My life? Don't play with that guy's life. You read these verses, you're like, this is, I'm being comical, but like when you really think about these verses, like this is a lot going on. Yeah. Can I tell you one that really sent me recently? Revelation chapter 2. We breeze over this, but this is wild. Okay, so Jesus is talking, and he's talking to the church of Smyrna. And that these things says the first and the last, which was dead and is alive. I know thy works, your tribulation, and poverty. So they're going through it. He said, I know the blasphemy of them which they're Jews, but they're really not. This is about Satan, so they're being discriminated. So they're Jewish believers being discriminated against other Jewish believers. And then look what Jesus says here. Fear none of these things which thou wilt suffer. So he knows that they're going to suffer. God knows that they're going to suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison. So God says, I know you're going to suffer, and you're going to prison, and you're going to be tried. And this is going to last for 10 days. And Jesus' response to this was, be faithful unto death. I'm going to rescue you out of your suffering. I see it coming. I'm going to do something about it. Jesus says, hey, you're about to suffer, have a hard time, get put in prison, and then you're going to die. You got it, Chief. Hold down the float, hold down the fort. You got it. That was Jesus' response. And he says, but you'll get the crown of life. I'm like, God, if you see it coming, like, make a way of escape. You know? My goodness. Like, pull up Peter. Open the doors. Where's my rota? Like, yo, is that Devin at the door? Open the doors. What's happening? Nah, none of that. And there's many verses like this that are just interesting to me like this. Time forbids me from talking about Abraham going into Egypt, lying to Pharaoh, and God punished Pharaoh because Abraham lied. What? God told Hagar, go back. How many Canaanites were slaughtered? How many Egyptians were slaughtered? Were all the Egyptians bad? Were all the Canaanites bad? That's good. I'm reading through these stories and I'm like, there's a lot happening here. And I hear all these things, and I think a simplistic view of good and evil does not account for the very robust nature of what's happening in the text. And so I have 13 minutes, and this is the beginning of me trying to articulate how to understand this. I'm going to ramble for 13 minutes, and it may be coherent or not. I'm going to try my best. When I open it for Q&A, we can ask questions. So my first bit of thoughts is that what makes the Bible interesting is that it's not just a list of statements. It's communicating deep theological truths primarily through stories and poetry. And so they are written in a way, like, I have to figure out what good looks like and what my good God looks like reading through these stories. And so that means, if this is the vehicle that God has chosen, could it be that there's much more meaning to these stories than what's happening at first blush? Could it be that there's something deeper happening in these stories, and I have to be willing to read them slowly and meditate and figure out, okay, what is God trying to communicate? So that's one thing that comes to my mind. Another thing that comes to my mind is how much of this whole discussion is God interested in talking about anyway? It seems to me that the Bible is much more concerned with giving us a pretty accurate depiction of what the world is like and saying, well, this is what you do about it. It's not so much, it seems to me, the question of why there is evil. God doesn't seem to be concerned about that very much. Okay. He doesn't seem to care as much as why there's evil. But he gives you a very realistic depiction. And what's interesting about this depiction, and he said, don't be ignorant, and don't be like confused, and don't get it twisted. The people of God are just as twisted and just as wicked. I heard it in a podcast today. If you look at the beginning of Judges, it says that the language that it used to describe the Israelites was the same language it used in Judges to describe the Pharaoh that enslaved the Israelites. You know, if you want the reference, the Bible Project podcast. And in Pharaoh's day, the one that started to persecute the Jews, it said that this generation, this Pharaoh, did not know Jacob. Judges starts with, this is the generation that did not know the works of God. And they proceed to act like Pharaoh. And they worship other gods. And they do all other things. And so God is very comfortable in his story about his chosen people. He paints them as the bad guys all the time. The bad guys, right? And like Rahab, who's supposed to be a sex worker, she's the good one. Right? You see that? So God is very interested. He'll mix up roles. He'll mix up roles a lot. And then think about the Joshua story. Yeah. What did any of the Canaanites, like you read it from one perspective, you could say this is judgment for sin. Like the nation is a sinful nation. The Canaanites have these wicked practices. You can read it that way, but you can also read it, these people just mind their business and a group of marauders just crossed into the land and started slaughtering people. You can read the stories both ways. And so, I feel like what the Bible is doing is giving you a description of life. Life is not black and white. Yeah. And as Christians, we like to simplify things as, well, this is good, and this situation is bad, and this is good. And we like to make these rulings when things are much more morally complex than we think. There is much more gray than we're really willing to admit. There's way more gray than we're willing to admit. Now, this is not a justification for sin. What I'm saying is we have to think deeply about what, like, dude, life is complex. We don't have a one-for-one Bible for everything that you're experiencing today, so we have to take some principles and just try to apply it. So, those are some other of my thoughts. Another thought that I'm having. You see premise 4. It says that if God is morally perfect, then he has a desire to eliminate all evil. I disagree with proposition 1 and 4. I disagree with 1 because of the way they define 4. And so the conclusion from that would be if 1 is wrong, that means 6 doesn't invalidate God's existence. And so the argument falls apart. So the linchpin for me is 4. Who's to say that God's perfection needs to be defined that way? And some articulation of this argument, it says, if God is perfectly good. By whose definition of good? What do we mean by morally perfect? Well, my suspicion is we take modern definitions of morally perfect, and we take modern definitions of perfectly good, and we anachronistically apply that to God. Anachronism is when you take something modern and you put it on something older. So that's your $2 word for today, anachronism. So we take our definition of good, go back 3,000 years and put that on text and say this is what it means to be good. I think that's a fundamental error. I believe the Bible does define what it means for God to be good. And the weakness of my argument for how the Bible defines good is it's not comforting. And I don't think the Bible wants to comfort you. Right. And that's okay. That's a weakness to my argument. Like, as far as evangelistic appeal, I don't think it's very good. But it doesn't ignore the suffering that people are going through. And it confronts it head on. I think it's an accurate depiction of how God operates. I think how I understand good and evil accurately describes the world that we're in. But it's not compelling. I think it's just a good description. For me, as far as I understand goodness and God's goodness is intertwined with his faithfulness to his covenant. What makes God good is covenant faithfulness. That's what makes him good. That definition is rough. What makes God good is covenant faithfulness. And I believe from the beginning until now and until perpetuity, God will be faithful to his covenant. That's what makes him good. People who aren't believers, God is still faithful to his covenant. You know why? Because he didn't flood the earth again. He didn't violate. So his commitment to humans at large, he's not violated. He hasn't flooded the earth again. Now, what's uncomfortable is that goodness of God is not defined by all of human suffering. It's defined by his relationship to his people. And that is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That is very uncomfortable. So so two things have brought me to this idea. One is a book by, I've referenced it before, it's called The Violence of God by Daniel Hawk. You should read that book, it's very helpful. But if you'll notice, well, let me wait. You wait. Because I'm going to give a summary statement that pulls all these together, and I think it'll help say what I'm trying to communicate. There's one more aspect and one more idea, and will be my final thing I'll add, and then I'll give my summary statement. My final consideration of how I try to make sense of good and evil is we use this spectrum of here's good and evil, and everything falls in those categories. And I think that's deficient. There's a scholar named John Walton. I think he was incredibly helpful for this. And he introduced another paradigm. So instead of the good-evil paradigm, good-evil chaos paradigm. If there's some books you want to read by him, I recommend 3. The Lost World of Genesis 1, The Lost World of Adam and Eve, and I could drop this to the slide. An Ancient Near Eastern Thought in the Old Testament, Introducing the Conceptual World of the Hebrew Bible. That one's a doozy, but it's good. It's a little dry, but it's helpful. It's situating the Bible in conversation with the surrounding nations. He's introduced to me the concept of cultural river. And so, I want you to hear some of his definitions that he uses. He defines good as an ancient person would understand good, and how an ancient person would understand bad, and how they would define chaos. Good would be defined as that which is ordered, functional, purposeful, and beneficial for human flourishing. Evil would be disorder or dysfunction in the established order, often associated with suffering, harm, or impediments to flourishing. It's a degradation of what's functional. Chaos is the absence of function, order, or purpose. Something much more, he would consider chaos as neutral. It's just a part of the physical creation. Some distinctions. Chaos is not morally evil, is neutral. So he would classify storms and natural disasters and disease. That's just chaos. It's evil, it's disorder without a purpose. For him, bad has intentionality connected to it. And so it requires it takes an active agent to be bad. So there's no agency, then it can't be bad. It's like if a dog does something, it's not a bad dog, it doesn't have that sort of agency. It requires agency to be truly bad. I'll read my concluding statement. So once again, all these ideas aren't fleshed out completely in my mind. So this is my best attempt to try it's all these random ideas amalgamated in my mind. So let me read this. I wrote a little statement here, and this will be the last thing I say, and I'll open up for questions. So in light of all of this, I think the story of good and evil is best understood as a drama. God has created a council of spiritual and natural beings to rule over his creation with him to create a beautiful world. But rebellion among his free will agents, both spiritual and natural, introduced tension and suffering to the world. The original vision for his cosmos is now being obtained through a progressive unfolding of covenants. Those in covenant are working with God to bring about his vision for the cosmos, and they are in conflict with those who aren't. The suffering that we're experiencing and that we see is an interplay between spiritual and natural beings in rebellion with a conflict of visions. It's God ruling and ordering the chaos whilst being in relationship with real and flawed people. And to me, it's in this complex interplay that we can make sense of the good and evil we see in the world. And so it's juggling all these factors. I think when we consider all those things together, it's why it gives me an answer to why good people suffer. Because the answer could be something like, there's somebody who is not following God's vision of suffering in the world. I mean, God's vision of a good world, and that's spilling into your life. Or there's spiritual beings that are rebelling against God that could be doing this. Or, I feel like it's just a more complex. Or maybe your suffering isn't at the hands of a human agent, but it's merely chaos. It's just, it's suffering without agency. It's the part of being in the natural world. So, those are just some of my thoughts. I haven't been able to pull it together concisely, and I'm still thinking through it and meditating and going through the scripture, so I'll revisit it in a couple of years and I'll have a more concise answer. So with that, I'm going to stop. I want to open up for questions. Anything you want clarified, anything that wasn't understood, I can try my best to articulate it.
What do you think about, have you heard Lee Strobel's, have you read his book, Case for Faith?
I read his One Case for Christ. I read that one.
I think he addresses the problem of evil in the Case for Faith. Mm-hmm. And he talks about, he presents an idea where suffering and pain and sin is like dealt with at the cross. And I don't know. I mean, I think what he says, this is the Jesse paraphrase, but I think Lee says that the reason we have suffering in the world is because if we didn't have suffering, who would hunger for God? What need would you have for seeking Him? Or, if you don't have pain, you wouldn't go see a doctor. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a similar version of God making use of pain for a greater outcome, right? It can be it's similar to soul-making theodicy, where you're going through these difficulties to lead you to Christ, right? It'd be a version of that.
Yeah.
He's making a similar argument. I like Lee Strobel stuff. He has some good stuff. I think he's worth reading. Add to your long library list of things to read. Before we continue with questions and comments, I want to dismiss the online. That way we can go. But I do want to, if there's more comments or questions. Thank you guys for joining us online. It's always a pleasure to have you guys with us. And, looking